بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Alhamdulillah, really appreciate the viewers for tuning in today. We have a very special guest, and of course, this particular live stream has been entitled Muslims Freedom and the GOP, and we're going to be bringing on very soon our special guest, our brother Bruce Fenton. And I want to just read just a short bio of him prior to bringing him on screen. Bruce Fenton is a former U.S. Senate candidate and an expert in Bitcoin economics and technology. He is the CEO of Changestone Labs and a longtime tech investor and licensed investment professional. He has appeared in articles and publications all around the globe, from CNBC, interviews in Saudi Arabia, discussions about Bitcoin and blockchain, and financial articles in the Wall Street Journal. He also has written articles for Coindesk and other leading blockchain and financial publications. He's been, of course, CNN and other places as well. So I'd like to welcome our special guest, the illustrious Bruce Fenton. Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam.
How are you?
Thank you so much for having me. Great.
Thanks for coming. I really appreciate it. It's a great honor. Right. So I wanted to have this conversation naturally, but first and foremost, I think it would be good just to introduce you to our audience. And perhaps the best way to do that is to introduce yourself. Who's Bruce Fenton? And, we'd like to know something about your background, your journey, and where things are right now. So go right ahead.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you so much. I've been in, my field is finance. I'm a father of four, and I have a wife and four children. I live in New Hampshire. That's where I ran for U.S. Senate last year. I ran as a Republican. I think we'll probably get into it later. I'm more of a what you call a liberty Republican. I've spent a lot of time. I'm in the Middle East right now. I'm in Dubai. I've spent a lot of time here. I first came to Dubai 21 years ago, 2002, and that's a key thing in forming my life and the direction of where I went. I was always interested in emerging markets and emerging technologies, so that's what brought me to the internet in 1994, and that's what brought me to Bitcoin. And in around early 2000s, I was interested in the emerging market of particularly this city, Dubai. I heard these stories. They were going to build a big building, and they were have a big mall and all of this. It was just a dream when I heard about it, and I came to see it firsthand. And that's interesting because that kind of affected my life a lot. I've always been skeptical about the news. Remember 2002 was a very, very bad time in the world. There was a lot of misconceptions about Islam, and so there was an opportunity to come here and see things. People were terrified of coming here to Dubai. People thought I was crazy coming to Dubai. They thought it was overrun by Al Qaeda or the Taliban or something like this. They thought that, and they asked questions like, do they have camels? Do they live in tents? These kind of things. And, of course I came here, and even back then, even 20 years ago, it was, not like people expected. And now they've built one of the greatest cities the world has ever seen. So that was exciting. And that brought me on a journey. It ended up having me come here a lot. I lived here in the UAE. I lived in Saudi Arabia for about half the year for 7 years, so I do like half the year there, half the year on. So, I spent a great deal of time in Saudi Arabia, and that kind of, changed my life and changed my, kind of outlook. And, the interesting thing was, I started reading books about, Islam for dummies and kind of things. I especially in 2002, I wanted to say, well, okay, what do these people really believe? I don't trust the news. It says everybody wants to, kill Americans or something like this. And, so the rest is history, kind of, but that's my main background, finance and emerging markets and emerging technologies, so I've been interested in emerging, technologies like Bitcoin and the internet, and emerging markets like this, which is now becoming a more mature market.
Yeah, yeah, subhanAllah. Yeah, it's really interesting, your background, and of course a lot of things you've accomplished, and of course you're into finance and Bitcoin, and you spend an investor, right? You've been an investor, a very successful investor apparently, and I didn't plan to ask this question. I was actually wondering, as you were speaking, do you think that your business relationships in Saudi Arabia and in the Middle East in general, that had uh, an impression, it actually was actually contributed to you having a different perspective about a lot of the propaganda, negative propaganda against Muslims and Islam post 9/11?
Yeah, for sure. It was right here in Dubai, that first trip in 2022. I had come to Kuwait in 96.
Mm-hmm.
And then that first trip in 2002, my friend who went to the college I went to, he invited me to dinner. He met me at the airport, and his mom came. That was the first person I ever saw wearing an abaya and a headscarf. It was the first woman I ever saw. And it's hard. It's kind of even sad to remember it now, but um, my first reaction was like almost like fear, like, whoa, this, I've never seen this kind of person dressed this way other than when they're terrorists in the movies, and it's almost embarrassing to say that. It's so long ago and it's so completely different. But it was that different, it was a different thing. And of course, we went and had a good dinner, and of course it's nice, wonderful people. And then I had, that was the first day. And now I've had 20 years of this, experience after experience. I've been to hundreds of majlises in Saudi Arabia. I've spent, thousands of hours sitting around with, Arabs and Muslims and talking.
Right.
And that's one thing. It's probably my favorite part of this culture. One of my favorite parts is these long dinners, and you get to really know people. I don't have a lot of friends in America that I spend 4, 5, 6 hours with, but here, you get to really know somebody. You spend 6 hours at a dinner. You do that 3 times a year, even. You kind of know that person, I think, and so yeah, that absolutely influenced my opinions, and then I became, so the rest of the story, I became an activist for addressing misconceptions. I became very passionate about addressing misconceptions, and that's why I originally started learning about Islam, was so that I could say, no, they don't believe in a moon god. No, they don't believe they're going to get 72 virgins if they bomb, a school. I was able to, get enough basic knowledge. It doesn't take much knowledge. All you have to do is, 5 hours research, and you can see that most of especially the misconceptions that were around back in 2002, 2001, post 9/11, they're just gross, horrible misconceptions that to me just felt wrong. And the more time I spent here, and the more people I met, the more wrong I knew it was, and the more I learned. And then I did spend some time, talking about these things, and that was actually why I got invited to Saudi Arabia. So I was raising money here. I was telling people actually about the investment story. I say, hey, this is going to be neat. And it was interesting because in 2002, you had to almost apologize for the Middle East. You say, hey, listen, I know what you're thinking, but these guys aren't terrorists. These are good guys. I've been there, and so, I was telling the story about, hey, they're going to build the biggest, tallest building in the world. They're going to build these palm tree. I'm on a palm right now. Palm Jumeirah. They're going to build Palm Jumeirah. I was explaining these things and how it's a cross section and, a historic place for the world and all of this. And then Saudi Arabia actually somehow found this out, that this, American guy was going around Wall Street telling people that Arabs are not bad, and Muslims are not terrorists. And so the embassy called me up on the phone and they said, hey, we hear you're saying good things about Muslims and Arabs. We'd like to invite you to Saudi Arabia. And I said, sure, I'd love to come to Saudi Arabia. I had, they said, it's a very big story here. So they invited me, and it was kind of funny. There was a little snag with the meetings and stuff, and then they felt bad, so they invited me to an even nicer invitation later. It was a mistake. There was a mistake, and they felt bad for the mistake, so they kind of like upgraded my invite. I got an invitation from King Abdullah, and to go to this very frankly above my league, really nice group, Tony Blair and Bill Clinton and Bill Gates. These are people I don't agree with ideology, but, important people nevertheless. And a lot of CEOs and things like that. And then I just ended up working with a lot of people and spending a lot of time in Saudi Arabia, like I say, and then ended up living there. And that kind of, changed my life. And then, it's seeping into my soul, hearing the call to prayer 5 times a day. And in Saudi Arabia, people talk about religion all the time. In the US, we don't talk about it much. I was raised to never talk about religion. A lot of people in America, don't discuss religion and politics, a couple other things. But in Saudi, everybody talks about religion. I had many people just kind of very frankly and just out of the blue. One guy I didn't even know the guy. I was sitting at dinner. He was way down the thing and he just came up to me. He says, "Hey, I'd like to invite you to Islam." And I was like, wow, that's like, I've never heard that. It's just kind of a interesting thing. And, so that was a very interesting experience, I think, living in Saudi Arabia. And, learn a lot and make a lot of friends over time.
Right. That's great. I mean, I want to talk about your conversion, but first I want to explain like why I asked that question. And it has something to do with the fact that generally when I speak to Muslims about like interfaith dialogue, I like to say that I don't like the way that we do interfaith dialogue because fundamentally it still sort of keeps us as somewhat like one-dimensional in the sense that when you decide, okay, we're going to have a special meeting between Muslims and Christians or Muslims and Jews, and we're going to talk about the similarities between our two religions, as if the only thing that defines me is my religion, right? And I sort of feel that that's the wrong approach to interfaith dialogue. If anything, what you want to do is try to get to seeing the humanity in the other person, to see that, okay, hey, you know what? The mundane things actually are more important than the ideological, right? In the sense that, in other words, they're a better way to actually help us to understand one another, to see like the humanity in one another. Because if you reduce me to my religious beliefs, then that makes it easy for us to just simply, okay, well, open up the book. What was the whole point in the meeting? If you are only defined by what's in the Quran or what's in the Bible and the Torah, the gospel, then okay, we could have just skipped this meeting and I could have just opened up your book and I would have been able to understand you better, right? But to me, it sort of interests me that, okay, well, maybe that was sort of your path, and it started your particular journey was that, okay, well, you know what? I'm actually interacting with these people that people are saying very bad things about. And, but I'm dealing with them on a very, high level, I'm in business, if anything, I mean, you get to see people, they're, shysters and they're not, what they're committed to, what they're willing to sacrifice, et cetera. Right. And so I just thought I was a bit curious about that, but okay. So at what point, do you become Muslim? Because of course, I think that this is one thing that the viewers who actually perhaps seen the advertisement for this particular webinar here, were unaware of that. They actually are Muslim. Say, okay, well, he's a GOP. He ran for Senate. There's a connection to Bitcoin. But is he Muslim or is he a non-Muslim? So like, I wanted this to come out. Okay, you are Muslim. So when did that particular journey begin? When did your conversion happen?
Yeah, it was a few years ago. It was a long process, I think I was probably Muslim 10 years ago or so and wasn't quite sure. Maybe I didn't know it, Okay. It was, the long and living there, of course, and meeting people and everything. I became more and more open-minded as I learned, like I said, first reading a little bit of the Quran and Islam for Dummies and watching some podcasts and talking to some people. I was really trying to think of the beauty of having the Abrahamic faiths believe in the same God. And I spent a lot of time in my advocacy work kind of trying to address misconceptions. I said, hey, they believe in the same God. Muslims believe it. I told a woman, I said, because many Americans, especially back then, and unfortunately now, and probably I predict it's going to get worse again, have no idea what Muslims believe. For some reason, there's a high percentage of people who think it has something to do with the moon, worshiping the moon or something like this, which I don't know where that comes from, very wild misconceptions. And I mentioned to a woman, I said, Muslims believe in Jesus. She said, well, what's going to happen to them if they do, if they admit it. She just kind of Islamic. No, this isn't, I'm not talking about a few, I'm talking about all of them, all Muslims.
Right.
And,
right.
Those kind of things, learning about, and talking about those kind of things made me think about the beauty of the one God, that we worship the same God. And there is quite a bit, I feel there's quite a bit of similarities between the three Abrahamic faiths and maybe even some other faiths. And so I was dwelling on that. And then, I always felt this beauty in Islam, especially being in Saudi Arabia. I looked at the Kaaba and I always felt like I was going to go there someday, even when I'd never identified as Muslim. I just kind of felt in the back of my mind, maybe I'm going to convert someday. Maybe I pictured that I would go there someday. And, I just always kind of thought of that. But it was sort of in the back of my mind. It wasn't a major thing that I spent a lot of time focusing on. It was just kind of something I thought of. But then when the world started getting crazier, especially around the COVID and things like this, as the world was more crazy, I was becoming more, stressed and looking for answers and looking for that would help, anxiety. And meanwhile, I was also on a deeper spiritual journey. And I talked to my friend, who's a Muslim chaplain at MIT, Suhail, and I said, I think I might be Muslim. What is a Muslim? And he said, you believe in two things. You believe in one God and only one God, and you believe that Muhammad, peace be upon him, is his messenger. So the first part was easy for me. I was much easier for me than many Christians, because there was times in my life where I was more agnostic. There was times when, my family wasn't very religious or was more religious. And I was kind of, I was more of a Unitarian before. So Unitarian is much, much closer to Islam, I think, than other Christians. Unitarians are a minority of Christians who don't believe or don't believe in the Trinity, and have a much more Islamic style understanding of the Trinity. So for me, the first question, do I believe in one God and only one God? I think that was easier for me. I say, of course it's God. We all, and I used to say this even 20 years ago. I said, Allah just means God. Arabic speakers say God all the time.
Right.
My friend,
Christian Arabs, they use Allah, right? They say Allah.
Yeah, exactly. And Muslim Spanish people say Deus or whatever it is in Spanish, And my friend here, who the friend who I came here, we're still good friends. We just saw each other yesterday. He says God all the time. God bless you. God this. God this. And so I said, it is the same God. It's just a different word, And then, but the second part, is Muhammad a messenger? And with that becomes the implication that the Quran is the word of God. So that's a bigger question. In my opinion, a very serious question. It's, and for me, coming from my background where I didn't believe that growing up, it was something of magnitude. I really thought about it deeply for a while, and then it became kind of like a cycle. Like, I really have to know. I really want to figure this out, because it is the word of God. I need to know. And then I say, well, okay, I think it is. I think it is the word of God. And I think Muhammad was a messenger. And then it was very interesting. And that was a very intense period. It was a few weeks. I was having a lot of dreams. I was thinking a lot. I was obsessing about it. I was watching hours and hours a day on YouTube. It was kind of like, I've got to get the answer to this. And then the more I looked, the more I said, yes, I think it is. And then I said, okay, well, I guess I'm Muslim then. And then I said, well, wait, now I have this responsibility. I feel like, well, I better know what's in the Quran better than I do.
Right.
The word of God, I need to know what it is and what it says. So that's, sort of beautiful.
Like, mashallah, beautiful story. I mean, Sheikh Suhail, Lahore, beautiful man too. I mean, I know him very well. So you cross paths with him. I mean, that's really, really nice. It's very beautiful, very gentle man.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, say it again.
I first met him over 20 years ago. And, it's very interesting. And I've said to many friends, there's many, many, many people who contributed a tiny, tiny bit in my journey. My friend in Saudi who invited me to pray one time, it was like 8 Muslim guys and me in a room. And he said, Bruce, you can pray with us. It's no problem. And it just made me feel good. And then there was the guy, random guy, I don't even know his name, who invited me to Islam. And there was, cab drivers who talked to me a little bit about this, the people who live a good life. I met Suhail at it was a Ramadan dinner in my town, maybe 20 years ago, or 18 years ago, something like this. And we just went because we love the food. We wanted we thought it would be nice company and like an open community thing. And then, I say, oh, this is going to be good. They're going to have hummus and everything. Let's go. Went and then they had a man come and do the call to prayer, which is beautiful, and that was probably one of the first times I heard it in person, and then Suhail came and spoke, and he happened to be sitting at our table, and he gave a very nice speech about it was the strength in, I think it was about kind of the strength in a man and protecting women, I think was sort of the theme, which is very interesting. And then he sat down at our table, just coincidentally, we talked and we said, hey, let's meet up sometime. And a couple months later, we went and had some food. And he was talking about how somebody had just converted. And it was a very moving story. It moved my wife is Christian. She's devout Christian. It moved my wife quite a bit. And then, him and I kept in touch over the years. And there's many, many people like that had, my friend here that I mentioned, Faisal, who I came here and met him, 20 years ago. He went to my college. He went like 10 years younger than me, or 15 years younger, but we went to the same college. And, just little questions here and there and these kind of things. So there's so many people that contributed to my journey. He's one of them. And there's a lot of people that I've asked questions. I ask questions from you. I have like a collection of different scholars and people that are knowledgeable that I'll text them occasionally and say, what's this mean? What's this mean? These kind of things. And it's nice.
I'm glad to be, the one who can help you out on your journey, and can contribute to, improving your understanding, and I really do appreciate the respect. Of course, we all know that you ran as a Republican, right? When you ran for the Senate in the last cycle in New Hampshire. Couple questions. How many of your colleagues would you say are aware that you're a Muslim? And then also, what does it mean to, what is the GOP? What does that mean? GOP, what does those letters stand for? What does it mean to be a member of the Republican Party? And of course, you're like the liberal, the libertarian, in your orientation. Why don't you explain to people, like, what does that mean? What is GOP? Was it, was a conservative as opposed to libertarian? And perhaps even like, how long ago did you decide that you're a Republican or you're a conservative, however you like to sort of characterize yourself?
Yeah, sure. First part, as far as how many people know, I've always been kind of private. It was interesting when I was first talking to Suhail about this, I said, I don't want to tell anybody ever. I'm never going to tell anybody. I said, is that okay? Can I be private Muslim? And he said, yeah, you can do the Shahada yourself and never tell anybody if you want. Because I said, I'm never going to tell anybody. It's not, it's just not me. It's not my style. I'm not comfortable with it. I don't want to talk about religion. I don't want to be a religious focus, and I've you're actually the first person I've kind of talked on like a public forum. I've been invited many times, and it's just kind of, I hadn't been comfortable. I'm getting more comfortable now. More people know now. I don't make a big deal about it. We talked about this even during I think I asked you and several others for advice during my Senate campaign. I was saying, how much should I mention this or not? I didn't want to be the Muslim candidate. I can't stand identity politics. I think it's against our religion. I think it's against humanity. It's a horrible thing. I think it's a terrible idea to say, somebody and they introduce themselves as a black accountant, and I thought I said, terrible. You're an accountant,
Right.
And I didn't want to be the Muslim candidate, this kind of thing. But I also didn't want to hide it. I'm not hiding it. Only 3 people asked during the campaign, and I answered, and it was never a big deal. And partly it's a very funny thing because I'm running against the Democrats. The Democrats' brand is diversity. So what did they attack me? They're not a big deal about it. Other people can't make a big deal about it. It would be crazy for them to make a big deal. So I just kind of, it is what it is. I don't make a big, I didn't want to be like, some people, and no judgment, of course, good
Yeah,
for
you
them.
want to be judged on the basis of your merit. It shouldn't be okay. Well, this is a pity vote. Oh, he's a
Right.
Muslim, or is this or
Yeah.
that, which is unfortunate. It's unfortunate that so many people do vote on that basis. It'll be a single, sort of factor. It's like, oh, the person's black, oh, the person's woman, oh, the person's Muslim. I have to vote for him. And so I do think that it's important for us to, okay, well, to be acknowledged, it's having talent. It's like, this individual's talent is very gifted, and so this individual will be a good leader, and that should be the basis of that particular choice, right? Of course, being a Muslim, I think being a Muslim does sort of add to that, in the sense that if you're a committed Muslim, then of course I think that qualifies you even more than other people, because you live a life of virtue. You're trying to be a virtuous person, because that's really one of the main signs or the hallmarks of being a Muslim, is being a virtuous person and wanting to make society better, right? So anyway, I'm sorry I cut you off, but continue.
Yeah. And then as far as like the second part of your question, the GOP stands for Grand Old Party. It's Republican Party.
Yeah.
I've been in high school. I was more Republican, kind of conservative. I was very, very against George W. Bush and against the Iraq War. I was an activist against the war. I actually campaigned for Democrats and supported some Democrats, mainly as an anti-war vote. For me, that was one of the most important issues. And then after that, I really became a libertarian, and that's, I still am a libertarian. I only registered as a Republican a little more than a year ago when I ran for office. You have to register with the party if you're going to run. It's impossible to win as a libertarian, pretty much. Very, very difficult. So of the two parties, clearly Republican has the most libertarians within it, and it was the best wing for me. But it is an important distinction. To me, it's night and day difference. I have nothing to do with Mitch McConnell, John McCain, Bush, Cheney, Rumsfeld style politics. It's completely against everything I believe in. But there's a very radically different wing of the Republican Party, which is the libertarians, Rand Paul, Thomas Massey, anti-war, Ron Paul, now Jim Jordan, who might be Speaker of the House soon, hopefully. It's a very, very different thing. They're non-interventionist, and there's some overlap. There's people like Ted Cruz that are a little both. He's made unfortunate comments about Islam and stuff, but he's also very low government. So if maybe he is not a huge fan of Muslims, it's okay actually, as long as he doesn't have rules about it. If he says, hey, look, if he says, Abdullah, Bruce, I think you guys are nuts, but I want to leave you alone, that's better than someone who doesn't want to leave us alone.
Exactly.
But the libertarian ideology that I subscribe to is one of non-aggression. And this is something I've talked to you about. I'm upset. That's how I found you, actually. I think it was Suhail that recommended to seek you out, because I've been searching. I've asked many people. I say, who are the Islamic scholars who understand libertarianism, and also during the lockdowns and the COVID, I said, who are speaking out against this? Because I feel like religious leaders and knowledgeable people should be speaking out against this.
Yeah, right.
And I only have a very, very basic understanding of the Quran, and I'm very new. In my heart, I know tyranny and I know evil when I see it. You don't need to be a scholar to understand good and evil. It clearly was evil what was going on. So I wanted to find the people who were, and that's how I found you. So I started following you on social media. That's how we connected. But to me, it's all about non-aggression, and the principle of non-aggression says that you don't have the right to hurt somebody unless they hurt you or unless it's in defense. And that sounds simple, and almost everybody agrees with that. All people of Abrahamic faith, everybody kind of, oh yeah, sure, don't hurt somebody unless they hurt you. Right. But in practical reality, almost nobody follows that, and including almost all of modern law. If you follow the non-aggression principle, you can't have a mask mandate, because you always have to ask, what if the person disobeys? And I always use the example of Rosa Parks. If somebody refuses, you need the power of somebody to say, no, I'm not going to move to the bus. I'm not going to wear your mask. I'm not going to do your thing. And what are you going to do about it? And this is a very American tradition. It's something that I have embraced, as you've seen. The viewers who don't know, I was, during the lockdowns, I went to the school board. I got kicked out 8 times, removed by police 5 times. I went in every school board meeting and I threw my mask on the ground and said I refuse. And I did clever stunts and funny things that every single time until they ended it. And that's a very, I think, American tradition, one of our greatest traditions. It's like, hey, wait a minute, we're a free country. Rosa Parks is where she wants to on the bus. I can say the words I want to say. I can wear what I want. I can breathe the air. I can walk down the street. And there's the line below that in America, which is like, and if not, go ahead and fight me. You're gonna have a fight on your hand. I'm not your slave. I'm not your servant. I'm not gonna be pushed down by your tyranny. Because it is tyranny. Because if somebody refuses, you have to always say, what if you refuse, then what? What else? Yeah, and if the answer is violence, if you refuse to, 3 years ago, if you refuse to put a mask on, somebody's going to eventually point a gun at you. First, they're going to tell you not to. I handcuffed you. But at the end of the day, really all laws are backed by violence. And we need to be aware, we need to see the gun in the room and see that violence is what backs all laws. Now, violence is justified. Violence is acceptable and I believe moral in certain cases. If somebody's hurting your family or threatening you, or they're about to harm you, or if they have harmed you and it is in the enactment of justice, those are legitimate uses of violence. If somebody doesn't fill out a form, or they didn't register their tech product the right way, or they didn't wear your face diaper political signal, those are not legitimate uses of violence. You can only use violence, in my opinion, against somebody who has harmed someone else, or justice, enforcement of contracts. The devil's in the details. There's a lot of nuances in this, but the general principle is don't hurt people unless they hurt you. And that's what kind of libertarian is about to me. And by the way, that includes taxes, because you can't collect taxes without the threat of violence. Otherwise, it's a suggestion. So I'm even against taxes. I want to cut this stuff down as much as possible and put as much power in the hands of people and as much freedom in the hands of the people and as little government violence as possible. Because government is like Ebola. It's a very, very dangerous thing. Governments have killed 300 million of their own people in the last century. Their own people, 300 million of their own people. It is the most dangerous force in the world. It's like giving a toddler a Dillon minigun, a high-powered machine gun. You don't want to use that Ebola. You don't want to use that machine gun unless it's absolutely necessary. Which means, if somebody's coming to kill you, yeah, sure, you use the violence, but not for all of this ridiculous stuff. You don't have a right to go to somebody and say, hey, give me your salary. Give me a piece of your wages that you earned. If you don't, I'm going to point a gun at you and put you in a cage and seize your home. And then I'm going to give it to, in San Francisco, some kind of artist grant or something. They were giving millions and millions and millions to artists, and they can't even keep the, and the artists are scams. It's who knows who. It's not the best artist anyway. But it's not the legitimate role of government to do that. Their only legitimate role is to protect life, liberty, and property. Because in my opinion, those are the only legitimate laws that government has a moral right to point a gun at someone from. And everything else should be a suggestion. If you want to suggest, wonderful. Like in Saudi Arabia, for example, it was very interesting. They changed the religious police, the Haya. They changed it from having the authority to kind of jail you, and they made that much, much less, and it was more of a suggestion, which is night and day. It's a 180-degree difference. I have no problem with somebody saying, hey, sister, please wear a headscarf. I'd have a big problem if they say, or else I'm going to shoot you, or else I'm going to, and this is an interesting thing. And I'd be curious on your thoughts on it. There's a lot of things that, like, my thought on it is, okay, so we're clear in the Quran. It says, don't eat pork. I think it's very clear. And I'm also interesting. I'm very skeptical about everything. I want to believe, I don't believe anything. I want to read it myself. So when I first was curious, I'm like, well, does he really say that? Okay, I look, oh yeah, it does actually. It's very clear. There are some things that are more, there's some things that are from hadith. There's some things that are more interpretation, kind of could go one way or another. I think the pork is pretty clear. But it doesn't say, therefore, if you see someone eating pork, punch them or point a gun at them or put them in a cage. You know, it doesn't say, and I think those things are harmful. You know, I'm against drug laws. I'm against drugs. I don't drink alcohol. I'm against alcohol. I think alcohol is horrible. I've had alcoholism in my family. I've seen alcoholism up close. I think alcohol is horrible, but I don't feel I have the moral right to put people in a cage because they drink alcohol or drugs or prostitution or anything else that I may disagree with. You know, I want to have a peaceful society and have little areas of power where people can exercise over their own domain, your own neighborhood, your own community. You can buy a you could have a housing development that somebody owns, and we say we don't allow alcohol in this housing development. Sure, that's private property. I'm all in favor of all of those kind of things. But when you have a heavy-handed state, I think it always leads to more violence and more problems and more of the kind of things that we see in it's authoritarianism in some form.
Yeah.
So
no, you spark a lot of thought, you know, when it comes to these things, you know, and definitely most of what you say about libertarianism, I don't think that there's anything that's challenging, you know, with respect to the attempt to reconcile it with, you know, proper Islamic teachings, right? It's only when you get to the point where we start to say, okay, well, I'm okay with, you know, okay, so I'm against drugs, I'm against alcohol, but, you know, I don't support any policies that actually would limit other people's access to it, or prostitution, right, or pornography, things like that. I think that that's when it becomes a little bit more of a challenge. Whereas, you know, again, as a Muslim, you not only have the obligation to practice Islam and, you know, carry out your devotional acts and to be a virtuous person, but you also have the obligation to call to that which is good. And even sometimes you may need to actually, you know, so bar the means to certain evils. Now, of course, there's some things which are very clear in the Sharia about, I mean, Islam does, you know, mention a punishment for public drunkenness, right? You know, or, you know, for fornication and adultery and things like that, you know, so there's no way around, you know, but of course we're not living in a Muslim society. So in that sense, we say, well, okay, well, we can't impose it, but at the same time, we can at least preach it and say, hey, well, these things are not good. You know, we can highlight, you know, the harms of pornography and prostitution, those type of things, and encourage people or discourage people from actually engaging in those things, right? But in an Islamic society, those things would be outlawed, you know, and they're punishable. You know, I mean, not every act which is deemed to be a sin in Islam is punishable. There's a very limited number of them, right? You know, which are punishable according to the teachings of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, right? So again, it's only when we get to those particular areas, but at the same time, it's because we're living in a country like our own that I would say, okay, well, what you say is not really that problematic, right? Only because of the context, right? So, but if we're talking about Saudi Arabia, and we want Saudi Arabia to secularize, we want, you know, the UAE to secularize. I mean, they're secularizing already right now anyway, right? But we want them to become more like Western countries, allowing for a lot of the indecent things, a lot of the things that actually has brought us down, right? You know, actually cause a lot of corruption. And you know, has led to a lot of distrust, right? You know, but definitely the bigger point about government intrusion into our lives, you know, the importance of small government, you know, the issue of taxes and those type of things. I think that, you know, our community, Muslims in general, I would say, especially, let's come back, for instance, talk about COVID, this whole thing with, you know, the lockdowns and the mandates. From my standpoint, my standpoint is that Muslims suffered a lot of dissonance, or it's a type of schizophrenia that exists here, you know, when it comes to politics, and in particular regard to this issue of the mandates. Right? So one, when it comes to politics, for instance, you know, Muslims will say, okay, those, you know, autocratic regimes in the Muslim world need to allow for more freedom, right? And they condemn them for being autocrats, right? And so there's a lot of distrust, you know, in particular for a lot of Muslims in the West and Western societies, you know, who don't live there anymore. So there's distrust, you know, directed towards them that these people are tyrannical, they're autocrats, you know, so there should be more freedom. But then in America, they'll put up with anything. And as a matter of fact, will be okay, with the tyranny, right? For instance, when the mandates came in, it was like Muslims were like, okay, hey, there's no Islamic basis for us not playing our part and contributing to, to the betterment and the protection of society from these illnesses. Now, but to be fair, one of the ways that they were able to dupe so many people was through the medical community. So there are a lot of Muslim doctors, right? There are a lot of Muslim engineers. Muslims they believe in science, right? So the governments around the world were crafty this time. Say, you know what, we're not going to make this seem as if it's actually coming from us. We're going to make it seem as if it's coming from the scientific community. It's coming from the medical community, and it was to the extent, but just not everybody, right? And so we're going to make sure we silence those voices that actually dissent from the official sort of narrative that we want to tell people. So I actually found myself signing exemption letters, not only for Muslims in the U.S., but Muslims in places. I mean, in Canada, a lot of Muslims in Canada, they didn't have any help in Canada. The imams, the mosque were like, hey, you have to do your part. And I said, well, I don't want to do my part, or quote unquote, do my part. It's my body. Right, and I don't think anyone should have a right to force me to put in my body something that I don't want in it. Right, so it's just unfortunate, that we got to that point. So in other words, on one hand, it's like where it's all about freedom when it comes to the Muslim rulers, right? But then when it came to this particular issue, it was like, okay, you know what, your freedom, to hell with your freedom, right? We have to help out, and they didn't understand, and many of them still don't understand the problem with that type of thinking.
Yeah, and they neglect, the U.S. and other Western countries are just a different form of tyranny. They have all kinds of tyranny about all kinds of crazy things. They're trying to police speech. There's the whole trans ideology, which is punishing people for not using pronouns and these kind of things. Right. A lot of that's not codified in law. Some of it's more, civil, but there's definitely a lot of tyranny. Mm-hmm. I mean, post 9/11, there was people getting bank accounts seized. The idea that you should need to report to some government official about what your KYC AML is, or, why is it their business? And I don't think that's Islamic either. There's nothing in there that says, oh, well, you can't do trade unless this guy up here says that you need the right form. And the problem is that is a form of violence, because if you don't have the form, then come the men with guns again. And then you have to say, well, is it moral or justified for them to do it? I mean, my advice to, Arab Muslim countries, Western countries, would be for the people to encourage as little government as possible. Just recognize, there is legitimate uses for the tool, but use it as little as possible. And then, just recognize that, see the gun in the room, see that it is violence, and say, is there another way? Is there any other way we could solve this? Is there another way we could solve this issue, whatever the issue is? And then the other thing is, most of the world would be better off if they just focused on the things that really are their most core legitimate roles, in my opinion: protection of life, liberty, and property. One thing they do really, really well here in Dubai, and I just did a video on my Twitter yesterday. I was in the Dubai Mall, and I was just talking about the contrast between this mall and San Francisco, where they just closed 6 Starbucks yesterday, and they've closed Target and Walmart and everything else. San Francisco has failed at protecting life, liberty, and property. Dubai has succeeded in protecting property. There is almost no crime here at all. So that's a big success. If governments just stick to the basic, I mean, San Francisco is almost too far gone to even, but I'm just baffled that they're so broken that they don't see, like, you really want to be stealing worker wages so that you can give artist grants, and you really want to be renaming schools to be more woke, and you want to enforce all kinds of trans ideology and make sure that companies have the right number of LGBTQIA2S plus or whatever. Is that really important when you have human feces on your street and you have people walking into stores and robbing them and no consequence? That's just crazy to me. Fix the first things. Once you've done a great job at saying, okay, now we have no crime. We have no crime. We have no murder, no rape, or almost none. Okay, now maybe. Okay, now you can go and mess with us on some stupid social issue. I'd prefer you never do it at all, but at least get those things right first. And so I think that the U.S. and the West has failed miserably on that as well. They're quite tyrannical at different times, Patriot Act and these kind of things. And it's like the frog in the boiling water. It's more and more and more tyranny. In my industry, finance, 30 years ago, you could open a brokerage account with me over the phone, and I could and I didn't need your driver's license. I didn't need your social security number. I didn't even need your date of birth. All I needed was your address over the phone, and I could say, okay, you bought some Microsoft, and you had a week to pay me. That was better. That was better than it is. Clearly better than it is now. So why 30 years later do we have? If you want to open an account with me now, it's going to take you an hour. I'm going to need your driver's license. I'm going to need. You're going to get all kinds of background checks. There's all kinds of stuff that goes on behind the scenes. It costs me more money, takes you more time. That doesn't serve anyone. And in my opinion, those kind of laws are immoral, because it's just burdening people. And then governments grow, and this happens everywhere, all over the world. You see it in this part of the world and everywhere. Governments, these people have power, and they're not producing for society. So the only way they can get more power is more taxes, more increase of their responsibilities, and these kind of things.
Yeah, right. Now, I like to pivot a little bit. Now, again, coming back to politics, you also are involved in the presidential campaign of Vivek Ramaswamy.
Yeah.
What's your role currently?
So I'm a volunteer. I'm the one of the co-chairs of New Hampshire. New Hampshire campaign co-chair. It's really an honorary role. I hosted some events for him and support him, and kind of put my name in our little network and our supporters, trying to get support for him. And I done some introductions at events and things like that, and I occasionally help out on a couple policy things, mainly really focused on the Bitcoin, fintech, financial kind of areas. I think he's a good candidate. In New Hampshire, we have the first in the nation primary, so all the candidates come there. It's very important for them to win New Hampshire, so it's a neat opportunity for somebody like me and the other candidates. One of the other candidates who ran against me, or we ran with each other for the same Senate seat. He's also co-chair. So there's a lot of people who are active in politics in New Hampshire who get involved with one of the political campaigns because it is important to those candidates.
Yeah, I mean, the whole country is in disarray. Of course, the Democrat Party, the Republican Party is in disarray. And of course, like right now, we see, of course, on the right, Trump is in the lead in all the polls. And then, of course, we have the additional candidates, including Vivek. And then we have this catastrophe once again with the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, happening right now. And I know you caught a little bit of flack sometime recently, actually before all this happened, because you had a post where you called Israel an apartheid state, and Vivek had to sort of create a little bit of distance between you and himself. What's your relationship like since then?
I think our relationship's fine. He clarified that he relies on me more. He said, Bruce, I think he made a tweet. He says, I disagree with Bruce on Israel, but I agree with him on Bitcoin and the Fed and CBDCs. He said he's right on these things. It was it made me feel sad for a few reasons. Is the backlash. It's not unexpected. I think the term anti-Semitism is way overused in the U.S. I think that organizations like the ADL are very harmful. I think 40% of the numbers under 100 are considered hate speech or hate symbols. If you go to Hate on Parade at the ADL website, it says that the 100% symbol, the numbers 11, 12, 13, 33, all kinds of combinations of numbers, the OK symbol, all of these are considered hate speech. And I think that's just really jumping the shark. I think it's very unfortunate. And it made me feel bad to be called there was all kinds of articles after I said this saying I was anti-Semitic. And that made me feel bad because I don't think I'm anti-Semitic. I don't think I've ever said or done anything anti-Semitic in my life.
Right.
I worked in New York in finance. I've worked with many, many, many Zionists, Israelis, Jewish New York people who I think tend to be, passionate, strong opinioned Jewish people. And I've always respected many of them. And there is so many good things about, especially the Israeli people, and even in this very same post, I did say apartheid state, but I also said that there's good things about Israel. They've won a lot of Nobel Prizes. They have very good universities and things like that. And I have very strong opinions, as many people do, about this. My goal, especially now with so much conflict in social media and things like that, is to try and improve the situation. It's very difficult. And so I don't want to be in a situation where I say something that just makes everybody hate me. Right. I'd rather have to listen to me. And so it's unfortunate. I think it bothers me if anybody gets called anti-Semitic. I think it's not fair that one question I would have for somebody like the ADL is say, what is the acceptable way to criticize Israeli foreign policy? I criticized foreign policy for 30 years. I called George Bush way worse things than apartheid. I called him tyrant. I probably called him Hitler. I called him I said all kinds of things. I criticized Bush. I criticized Trump at times. I criticized Obama all the time. I said, why did we elect Obama and he kept bombing everybody? I thought this guy was going to be different, Right. So how? And I think Justin Trudeau belongs in jail. I think he's a complete tyrant. And so I can criticize Trudeau. I can criticize Sweden. I can criticize the EU and Germany and Merkel, and I can criticize London and the UK, and I can criticize every politician in my own country. My question for the ADL would be what is because I just like many of these other governments, I do believe that there are problems with the Israeli government and their foreign policy decisions. And I would like to know, there must be a way that I am allowed as a citizen to criticize them without being called anti-Semitic. I think it's very damaging, and I think it cheapens the idea of real anti-Semitism. I think it's very unfortunate. So anyway, that's kind of my thought on it. I think it's unfortunate that people get dragged into this. We should be able to have dialogue. It shouldn't be forbidden. And then in the U.S. there's just layers of complexity on top of this. There's the whole angle that many people in the U.S. have no idea what the conflict is over, what's going on, no idea about the history. There's the whole Hamas and Hezbollah. You have people going to parades saying Hezbollah is great. They're using things that muddy the waters to make these things unclear. But you also have situations where people are waving a Palestinian flag and somebody says they're anti-Semitic, which is clearly not the case in any way. So I hope and think that, it would be nice if we had some, more even dialogue. I don't see that happening.
Yeah, exactly.
But
it's very difficult.
Yeah.
Very difficult. Very difficult.
I'm friends with a lot of, I find the Israelis to be more reasonable than many of the Americans. The Americans, because most Israelis, they know Palestinians. They've met many Arabs. They've met many Muslims. Most Americans have not. So a lot of the most extreme Americans, they have no idea. They think this is a battle of good versus evil. They think the Muslims are evil. And that's not. That's obviously a big problem. So I think if we could have, just a little bit more reasonable dialogue, and I'd like to try and do that, no matter how strong my opinions are, I try, and I fail sometimes, but I try to be diplomatic and do something that, I ask a lot of questions. I had some great conversations with Israeli people just over the last few days, and they weren't tense or problematic. I just ask them their opinion. What do you think about this? What do you think about this? What's going to happen next? These kind of things. I do the same with everybody. Hopefully it's not too late. We're going to have to at some point. Unfortunately, it looks like we're headed for a lot of pain on all sides, but eventually people have to talk and find some kind of common ground and have a reasonable conversation.
Yeah, Allah grant you success in that. It's very difficult. I don't envy your position. I actually don't envy Vivek's position either, because I actually think that he was still very brave, even in his criticism of you, right? Because he could have said, you know what, I completely dissociate myself with Bruce Fenton because of Israel. But he said, no, we disagree on something, but he's still my friend, right? We're still going to work together, right? So
I respect that. And he runs his campaign similar to me. I took a stance on everything. He's not afraid to take an opinion on everything. And if you take opinion on everything, you're going to have more people who disagree with you on more stuff because you've said more stuff.
Right. Right.
And we may, and you know, it's interesting. I'd rather focus on the things we do agree with. You know, he is for non-interventionist foreign policy. He wants to protect America. He wants to reduce, you know what we're doing in government. He wants to reduce government headcount by 75%, which I think that's, I mean, that alone probably makes him better than every other candidate. And I think he's certainly, if you know, it goes both ways. If I had been, I really liked Ron DeSantis because of his stance on COVID, but his comments over the last week, if I had volunteered for his campaign instead, I might have quit, because it was just, he said every Gazan is anti-Semitic, and I just can't support that. To me, that's a very, very damaging and ignorant statement. And I feel like watching DeSantis, I think that he is sort of similar to Ted Cruz, you know, a good person who just has bad information. Both of them, very clear to me that they don't understand Islam at all. And so that's a problem. So there's certainly candidates that have really bad opinions on this. Nikki Haley, Mike Pence, they're very hawkish. You know, Nikki Haley seems to think that everybody in Gaza is a terrorist and they should all be killed. You know, they don't have any nuance, and they don't really know.
But you know, a lot of times, you know, I'm not completely certain if it's because they really don't like Islam. I sort of feel that, in particular, those who are running for the presidency, I think that most of those people are just simply saying what they believe needs to be said in order to get votes. Right. I feel that way about Nikki Haley. I feel that way about, you know, Pence. I feel that way about Ron DeSantis. I don't feel that way about Vivek, right, necessarily. I mean, I think it's a little bit something there. You know, I think he doesn't want to completely offend, you know, sort of, you know, cause any major aversion there, you know. But I do respect the fact that he didn't say, you know what, I have nothing to do with this man anymore, like when Obama did to his former pastor, right? Totally, you know what, you know, totally cut him off, right? So, yeah, I often feel that way. But I mean, but it could be the opposite. It could be what you say. Maybe they really don't. Maybe it is a genuine, a sincere belief that drives them to say those type of things. I don't know.
Yeah, it might be. I mean, I think that just having so many conversations with so many people, and it's interesting, you know, we've talked a little bit about kind of like, you know, how I look, and I don't look at first glance. You're not going to assume I'm a Muslim, you know, especially if I'm wearing like a plaid New Hampshire redneck outfit or something like this. And that's it's interesting for me because I get treated different ways by different people, you know. So sometimes people will say things about Islam or Muslims having absolutely no idea. Why would they guess? You would never guess if I didn't say something. So, you get I get an interesting perspective from where I am and in all of these many conversations. And I think that there just is Islam and Muslims, by most Americans who are not, you know, who haven't had connection with it, is viewed as like an other. It's like a different, from what my understanding is, in closer to the time of the Prophet, it was viewed as kind of a natural progression of Christianity and Judaism. It was almost like maybe the way that Episcopals and Catholics or something like this. It wasn't like, whoa, you know. And people understand, and I think in this part of the world, and including even in Israel, I think they understand. Everybody in Israel knows what Muslims believe. They know it's not a moon god. They understand. Whereas in America, it's this kind of other. And you know, and sometimes they're good people. They're not bigoted people. They're not racist people. They're just not informed. And I've had a lot of people, especially here. It's funny, you know, even like they don't know I'm Muslim, and I've had Americans, like, it's kind of cute if it could be even polite, a well-meaning person, they could say something like, hey Bruce, am I going to offend the Muslims if I tell them I have a girlfriend, you know, or hey Bruce, you know, like, I accidentally told a guy that I drank and I was so embarrassed, you know. Something like, one guy was at a party one time and he said, we were in Saudi Arabia and he had a orange juice and he said, oh, I wish this was champagne. And then he felt so terrible. His face turned red. And he says, oh, Bruce, I felt so embarrassed. And I said, don't worry about it. They're fine. I said, 90% of these guys went to school in the U.S. They have houses. Some of them drink. You know, they're going to be. There's certainly, even the most religious among them, who they're not going to have a problem. These are worldly people. And so it's nice, even if somebody is well-meaning, there's still like deep misconceptions, and they assume that Muslims have some of these, you know, kind of cartoon character visions that the propaganda puts out, you know, that it's you know, kind of ignorant or whatever, you know, all of the stereotypes. And so I my guess is that probably, you know, Haley, DeSantis, Pence, my guess is that they're probably good people who are not bigoted, but that they probably do not have much. I bet you they couldn't tell you very much at all other than what their briefers have told them.
Right.
But they probably really don't know much at all about Islam. They probably haven't talked to Muslims, and they probably haven't internalized it. And and one thing I hope is that I can help bridge that. You know, if somebody's named Abdullah or Muhammad or something like that, and they're talking to somebody in Iowa, that person might just be like, you know, wait, can I trust this? Is this person secretly want to kill me? You know, this was the kind of image that they put out after one of the most horrible things that I saw after 9/11. It was very, very subtle, because sometimes the most horrible things are very subtle. The FBI put out this thing and said, we're reaching out to the Muslim community. We know you're not all terrorists, but if you know the terrorists, please let us know. As if everybody, like, oh, no, they're not terrorists, but their cousin probably is.
Right.
It's a horribly bigoted, terrible, racist thing. But you have people who kind of almost mean well. They're just really uninformed, and I think that's one of
I was at a fundraiser.
My responsibility to try and address those things. And long before I converted, I was trying to address those misconceptions. I'm just champion of truth. I want people to know what's true. You know.
Yeah. I was at a fundraiser a couple of days ago, and they had the it was a Muslim fundraiser, and they had one of the local politicians speak, and during the and he had his wife with him, and so she said towards the end of her statement, you know, we know y'all stand for peace and non-violence, you know, and then she walked off the stage, and I was just like, well, yeah, well, that's not very flattering, right? You know, it's like, well, why do you feel you need to say that, right? that we don't stand for non-violence, right? You know, so it's he probably, again, she was well-meaning. She probably didn't think it would offend anyone, you know, but she doesn't understand what it sort of implies at the end of the day, you know.
Yes. It's a big world, and people need to understand, you know, and especially, I feel especially bad for American Muslims post 9/11, you know, some of the nicest people, and also people who have, in many cases, they fled the ideologies of countries that had, you know, really authoritarian, you know, a good chunk of the Muslims in America, them or their ancestors came from countries that were very authoritarian, and they love America and have embraced America. So I think it's a very harsh thing on the psyche. I kind of wish I would have been Muslim and my age back then, because I would have fought like crazy. I would have, you know, I would have been out in front saying, no, you know, this is wrong. This is wrong. These are Americans. These are American people. Don't, you know, cloud this with this idea that, you know, 1 in 10 of us are terrorists or something like that. You know, it's interesting. And this is one of the things I did when I was doing my earlier activism. I went up and counted the number of Muslim terrorists. If you don't count war, and I don't think it's fair to count war at all. You can't count people in Iraq. If anything, they're defending their home, whatever. It's certainly not terrorism. But if you count like actual terrorism, you know, suppose you include 9/11, the Bali bombing, you know, all these different things, it's like 450 people ever. So it's you know, it's not like if you go and you ask like your average American in you know, conservative in middle America, or even your average lefty, you know, lefties are just they're even worse bigots in many ways. If you say, you know, what percentage of Muslims are terrorists, they say, oh, no, I'm a good person. I understand that Muslims are, it's probably only 3%. No, it's not 3%. It's 0.0000001%. It's a insignificant number. And it's a propaganda tool to say that there's more than there isn't, you know, and they blend everything in. And this is the problem with Americans not understanding the world. You know, you had Anders Breivik, who was a Christian who, in the name of Christianity, killed 70 people. You know, you have many Christians who've done that. There was Christians in Latin America. You have the Lord's Resistance Army in Uganda, who's Christian, who says, we're going to cut your arm off if you don't convert. They come up to you. They say, do you accept Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior? If you say no, they chop your arm off, you know, and so the world is a big place, you know, and to you and I know this, and I think every Muslim knows this, and hopefully most people should know this, but you're right, Muslims in America have absolutely nothing to do with the ideology of those tiny number of extremists. There's this organization, Memory. Memory is, as you know, I'm sure, funded by, it's basically Israeli intelligence, former Mossad, and that runs it. And it's, in my opinion, puts a very biased anti-Muslim. They'll find like the one guy who's the craziest guy in wherever, and they say, oh, this Muslim man killed his daughter because she was watching TikTok. She was dancing on TikTok. Killed his daughter. Well, that's not significant. That's not statistically significant. A Christian father could do the same thing. These are not, and they take these very extreme examples of, Taliban is it's not 1% of Muslims. It's a tiny. It's like the KKK, to Christianity. It's a tiny number. And so trying to get people to understand this is important. And I feel bad for especially the American Muslims, because it's hard to, like, I'm a fighter. Like, I'm not afraid to go out there and give a speech and yell at people and get arrested or something like this. I'll do a protest. Most Muslims that I know, that's not their personality. It's not their upbringing. It's not their style, especially if they came from another country. That's not celebrated in other countries. It's something that is, we probably could have used those kind of activists to be like, hey, no, what are you talking about? And fight back. But it's very hard. And it's also hard to fight back, because then if you're being attacked, you don't feel like fighting back, because you feel like you're going to get attacked even more. So I feel very bad for the kind of psyche of American Muslims. I think and I think the wounds still exist today. I think the wounds exist today, 20-something years later, where, there's this like, hey, how did my own country slap me down and treat me so badly based on really stupid misconceptions?
Yeah, right. Exactly. Right. So one final pivot before we see if anyone has any questions. With your experience with Bitcoin and what's happening in the crypto field, how much would you say that the international sort of conflicts, are connected with, revolutions happening in the finance sector, in the banking sector, and things like that? Do you feel that there's some connection, overlap, with all of these events?
Yeah, for sure. And there's also an overlap with Islam, I think, a bit. The money is broken in the world now. The money is a scam. It's fake. And I don't have the authority to say that it is an Islamic violation, but I know some people who do, who do have, like my friend Muahe. He's a scholar. He studied at Medina, and he believes that fiat money, our dollars, are riba. It's a scam. It's all based on debt and phony debt, and people who are interested. He's 10,000 times better than me to listen to. He's on Twitter, and there's a small number of there's only a couple scholars that I know, but a lot of Muslims, a lot of other, people, just interested people who are Muslims, who are interested in this concept, talking about how, the money is broken, and forget about, whether it should be forbidden or not. That I'll leave that to knowledgeable people like you to decide. But clearly we know right and wrong, we know good and evil, and we know that this system of money that we have now is broken, and it funds a lot of evil. We have fake money now that politicians can print from thin air. Neil Kashkari from the Fed, former Fed, he said all you do is press a button and it's unlimited. Well, that's not real money, and that doesn't go in line with what money has ever been. It wasn't that way in the time of the Prophet. It wasn't that way now. It shouldn't be that way now. Gold and silver, sound money, is limited in supply, and you can't just create it from thin air. The money we have now, they can just print a button and give it to BlackRock or give it to, Boeing or Lockheed, and they're probably going to give some to Israel soon. They gave a bunch to Ukraine. And that's what funds the war. Because if they had to come to you and say, hey, we need, Dr. Ali, I need 30 grand. You're going to say, why? You say, oh, because I want to bomb somebody over here. You say, no, thank you. I'm not going to give you my 30 grand. Well, they're taking 30 grand every year from every American to do all of these bombs and everything all over the world. So, foreign policy and the disasters in America are very closely tied to the money. The money is broken. The money's broken, and it automatically becomes corrupt if you can print it from thin air. If you talk to a 6-year-old, printing money from thin air is the kind of power that a 6-year-old would want. It's a child like, oh, I wish I could print money from thin air. I wish I had my own money printing press. It's like a childlike fantasy. But unfortunately, it is the reality of adults in this world, powerful adults who really can print money from thin air. And they do quantitative easing, QE 1, 2, 3, 4, all of this kind of thing. They print billions of dollars from thin air. And where does it go? It goes to wars and violence and a for-profit prison system.
Yeah, and also damages the buying power also of the dollars. If everything goes up, right? People, I think that's an important part for a lot of people to understand is that the more money they print, the less we can buy with that money that we actually have available to us, right? Yeah,
it's robbing you. If you and I play the Monopoly game, and I have a magic marker and I can draw zeros on my money and you can't, I'm going to win. And that's not a fair. It's hurting you. I'm devaluing your currency because I'm making mine more. So it's a cronyism game. It's very corrupt and broken. And there's a great book, actually, and it's by a Muslim, actually, Safety and Amos. He wrote a couple books, the Bitcoin Standard and the Fiat Standard.
Right.
And I forget the name of his newest book. The Fiat Standard is funny because it talks about exactly these concepts. And he mentions that when everything has this phony money, you end up with less accountability and bad decisions and these kind of things. So one of my favorite examples in there is food. In the US, people are fat because of fiat system, because you have this phony money printing it out of thin air, and these Midwest states that produce a lot of corn, who have a lot of electoral votes, they shower them with fake money and they give them corn subsidies. So now we have corn syrup in ketchup and every other product in America because of broken money. And it's the same as like you see in San Francisco with these artist grants, and just the stupider things government does with money, it becomes from the fiat system. If they had to come to you and take your money, they wouldn't be able to do these stupid things because the people wouldn't support it. But when they can kind of silently, secretly tax you by just printing more money for themselves, and it devalues your currency. So it's all tied together. It's tied together with Bitcoin and freedom and Islam. And anybody interested, I'd definitely recommend, search out like Muslim Bitcoiner and some. I know you follow some of these folks. And they talk about this kind of stuff all the time, and I think that's very fascinating because, to me, again, I don't have the knowledge to make a judgment one way or another. I listen to other people, but I do know right and wrong, and I know good and evil. I know that the Iraq War is evil, and I know it wouldn't have happened without the fiat system, and that that's pretty powerful right there. If we were on a gold standard or a Bitcoin standard, but just call it gold to make it simple, if we had gold standard, the Iraq War would have been 6 months at most. It wouldn't have been, we wouldn't have been in Afghanistan 20 years. And we also wouldn't have this fellow Moahi and I talked. It was interesting talking about the for-profit prison complex. We have more people in prison than the Soviets had in gulags. And he was actually making a case for, caning and hitting. And at first I said, oh, no. As a libertarian, I can't condone the state hitting people. But he made a pretty good case for it. It's more humane and better for society than putting them in a prison, especially for a victimless crime. You have people for nonviolent crimes that are, drug crimes that are in jail for 20 years. And that costs you and I, the taxpayer in California, it's $70,000 a year to put somebody in there. So we're going to spend $1.4 million to put somebody in a cage because he, so I actually came around on that. I actually do think that can be a very effective punishment. And honestly, at your base level, going back to like, some people actually probably could use a beating, like these people who just continually steal and steal and steal. They don't get reformed by going to jail. Maybe it would be better to go back to something like that. So even something like that to me initially sounded kind of like a crazy idea, it really sort of makes sense,
Yeah. Well, two final questions on the same topic. Now, what is the danger of a cashless society? And what is the CBDC? And of course, the potential dangers of that.
Yeah, that's a great question. And they are hand in hand. CBDC is a central bank digital currency. So, we have digital money, which is like Bitcoin, money that can move from my phone to your phone or computer to computer, which is great, provided it's not controlled by somebody. If you go back to where government's controlling, it's a totally different thing. And the danger with a CBDC or any of these sort of things like they have in China is government will have the power to shut people's money off. If you don't have the right social credit score or something like that. And that's very, very dangerous. You don't want to give politicians any more power than they already have. We already saw people's money shut off in the Toronto or Canada protests. And, I worry about us marching towards this world where we have a China-style global social credit score and your money can be shut off based on, if you make the wrong kind of tweets or something, or any reason. It doesn't matter the reason. They shouldn't have the power to do that, because in a modern world, in a digital world, shutting off somebody's money is a much bigger deal than it was 500 years ago. You and I couldn't have this conversation if I can't pay my phone bill and I can't buy a phone and I can't I can't even go anywhere because they've shut off my money. I could go back and live on my farm and I could write a book with my hand, but you're not going to have any impact in the world. So it's very, very dangerous. And I think we should reject it entirely. These ideas of having money, controlled by government to any, ideally they shouldn't be involved in it at all. If I asked 100 Republicans and 100 Democrats what's important for government, I'd get a lot of different answers about healthcare or wokeism or business or whatever. Almost none of them would say controlling the money supply. You don't need them to do it. We can decide what money. For thousands of years, people decided what money is. They just go to something that is rare and scarce, like gold, and movable and fungible. And there's properties of money that have existed for a long time. And that's what money is. We don't need, people in fancy offices, tyrants stealing our money to tell us what money is. We can decide between ourselves. Maybe I want to trade you a book for another book or something like that. We don't need somebody else involved. So it is very dangerous. I think we should be aware of CBDCs and, fight them and reject them, and also look to alternatives that move outside of the system. For a long time, that was gold. I like gold. A lot of gold bugs became Bitcoiners. I like the idea of moving away from a system where it's just money that politicians can print for their cronies with the push of a button.
Yeah, mashallah. Yeah, I totally agree. It's just, we could go on forever. With this, so many different things we could be saying and talking about. But I want to give the those who are following us today to to offer any questions that you may have. I see a couple of comments so far, but I'm actually looking more so for questions. I'll share some of the comments too, because I don't want to act as if comments are not that valuable either. But here's one comment. I don't know if the person is being facetious at the time, but as a right-wing conservative, I believe we need to speak out on those out to those on the right, that what is fair, and we need to stop aiding Israel, right? So, I don't know.
Yeah, I'm not in favor of, and it's interesting. I was very consistent about Ukraine. I said it's not our fight. We shouldn't put our money into it, and I'm consistent about Israel on that. And I don't think, I know that if I say, I got attacked about Ukraine, but I know if I say it about Israel, I'll be attacked more. And I don't think that's reasonable. I think, it's not the place of the United States. Anybody should be able to volunteer themselves. If somebody wants to go and support Israel or Hamas or Palestinians or whatever they want to do, as long as they are not, directly hurting Americans. I think people, if somebody wants to support Israel, it's very easy. Israel, you can send money to Israel. There's billionaires who do it all the time. And you can even enlist, especially if you're Jewish. You can just go and join the IDF if you want to. But I don't think it's fair for somebody to say, I'm going to take your money. I'm going to take Dr. Ali's money and give it to somebody who doesn't agree. I don't want my money sent to Zelensky. I don't trust him. I don't want my money sent to any country. I want to keep my money for me and my kids. So I think we should cut aid to everybody. And this is nothing against Israel. It's certainly not anti-Semitic. It's nothing against Israel specifically. Although, I have, I think they have a lot of foreign policy problems. So that's even more of a reason to not. But I don't think we should be giving money to anybody.
Right. And that's good answer. Yeah. I think also I would add that that too often, again, I don't know if this particular commenter is a Muslim or not, but okay, all right. Now said he is a Muslim or she. Where I think it's one, So, but I do think that there's a very oversimplistic sort of understanding of how complicated things are in politics. That yeah, sure, we know what the ideals look like, but I do think that no one with any I felt anyway any sense would disagree with the statement is that that our politics are very corrupt. Politicians are corrupt. Our system has been, infiltrated by a lot of corrupt actors, right? And this is what makes it so difficult, right? You can say, yes, stop, supporting, stop sending funding to this place or that place. But, the entire system, there's something wrong with the system, the fact that powerful people were able to put in public office their, proxies in order to to do their bidding, that it's very difficult for you to say, but at least we can say, okay, I'm against it, right? And that should be enough, on one level is like, listen, okay, I'm against it, and if it were to come up to a vote, I would vote against it, and that should be reason for appreciation, but unfortunately, what often happens is that I see certain Muslims, that they can be a bit very immature and basically say, hey, well, because you weren't able to push things through the way that we expected them to be pushed through, then, you're not going to get my support, but they'll give support to the Democrats, and again, this particular program is not about trying to convince anybody to become a conservative or anything like that at all. If anything, it perhaps is a way to help you to understand conservatism or libertarianism a little bit better. That's part of it, right? But because I do think that most Muslims and even a lot of minorities don't fully understand what's happening on the right, as much as they understand what's happening on the left, and then they may not even understand what's happening on the left because it's just a blind sort of allegiance to anything which is, happening on the left, where when someone asks you to vote right, then we start talking about, okay, oh, well, we have to vote our interests. We have to vote our own morals. We shouldn't be supporting anyone, blindly, but you don't say that when people ask you to vote for the left. Right? But then when people call you to vote for the right, then Muslims start to say, oh, well, we don't take sides. Yes, you do. You do take sides, right? So I just wanted to throw that in there. But I think there's a follow-up here from Juan again. He says, as a Muslim, my views are aligned with the right, but this is the only issue that I don't agree with. As Muslims, we should lean conservative, right? Okay, so that's redeeming, I guess you'll say, because again, I wasn't sure if Juan was is actually just being facetious or being a bit cynical, through that earlier statement, being a right-wing conservative, so I wasn't sure if you were sort of playing a third. Speaking in the third person or sort of, trying to,
yeah. Did you get that a lot?
Wind this up, as we say, right? Wind this up, right? So,
yeah, Muslims are kind of without a political home a little bit. I think,
yeah.
we've talked about this a little bit. I wrote a piece on Twitter a few months back about. It was really for Republicans, saying Republicans should reach out to Muslims. I would like to see more Republicans. Where I was in New Hampshire, like I said, it wasn't an issue. It's not a very religious place. There's not very many Muslims, but the people aren't very religious in general. In other places in the country, it might be more problematic. If I was running in, West Virginia or something, certain other states, it probably would have been a bigger deal. And it might have. I don't think it cost me any votes in New Hampshire. I don't think a lot of people didn't even know or care. But if it was a big deal in another state, then they might care, because unfortunately, there is some remnants from that, Bush Cheney, and I hate to say it as a Republican, but there is bigotry in the Republican Party. There is misunderstandings. There's probably more people that are a little bit less educated and less tolerant. And there's not many, but there is some bigots who are just outright, don't think Islam's a good thing. And then the left, has its own issues. The left was a clear alternative to George Bush. Even I supported the left at some points because George Bush was so bad. But now, they've abandoned. I was talking to a Muslim here just a few hours ago, and he was talking about how tragic it is that the Democrats have become anti-capitalism. And he believes capitalism is a very big, important part of Islam, going back to trade and the time of the Prophet and everything. And it sounds great to me. I mean, the Democrats have hurt the economy. And then most recently, there's the wokeism, which Muslims are like, hey, I signed on, great. George Bush is terrible. I'm going to support Democrats. And they're like, okay, great. Your son needs to wear a dress now. You say, whoa, I didn't sign up for this. I'm not putting my kid on. This isn't what I signed up for. And by the way, I've probably talked to 500 Muslims about it, and almost every single one says the same thing. Especially the Americans, Muslims. They have no problem with anybody. They're just like, let everybody do what they want. They came to America. They're not naive to America. It's not like they're sitting in their mosque and, they've never watched Netflix or never seen a gay person or something. It's absurd. These are regular Americans that are in the regular society. And every single one that I've ever spoke to, they say, hey, I have no problem with anybody. Let somebody be gay if they want. Let them do what they want. And if they want counsel from me, I'll give them counsel. It's not my place to get in their space. But when they come in to get into our space and try and impose an ideology, and particularly in my opinion, the current iteration of the LGBTQIA2S plus trans ideology is actually anti-women and misogynist. It's a harmful, evil ideology, And so to me, that's just a totally different thing. So a lot of Muslims are like, wait a minute, I didn't sign up for this, and it's been a very interesting, I talked to Shuki, I forget her last name. She ran against Ilhan Omar, or was going to run against Ilhan Omar. She's Muslim. She's a conservative Muslim, was going to run. Ilhan Omar obviously has been, maybe too far on the woke side for some Muslims. So it's very, very interesting. I wish I could say, hey, Republican is the party for you, but I don't believe. I'm very frustrated with Republicans. I don't want to be a Republican anymore after last week. We'll see, but but to put a positive spin on that, I think don't be discouraged, because there is people who are libertarian, wing. You can find people within that do have your ideology. I think there is a lot of politicians that that would put the things that Muslims care about at the forefront. Vivek is a good example. He cares a lot about family, he cares about God, he cares about faith. He's Hindu, so he's a minority, just like Muslim is in some ways, but he wants to respect everybody, respect Christians, respect Muslims, respect everybody, let them do their own thing, and cut government a bunch. So those things, there are people who we have in line. And I think it would be great if it was a bigger voting block, where the more of a voting block you are, the more power you have.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that that also there's I would add to this that what a lot of people don't understand, that there's a difference between the politicians and the populace, right? Whether we call it the base. And so even like, for instance, if you look at the Republican Party, like right now, it's largely Trump's party. Right, and so many people who actually vote Republican are not voting Republican because they like the Republican Party. It's because they like Trump, right? And so they see Trump as an outsider, or Trump sort of he got control of the Republican Party. Of course, there are definitely some people who actually are diehard Republicans, right? So I'm going to vote Republican regardless. But like right now, it's like, okay, it's because of Trump that I'm Republican, not because of the Republican Party that I'm Republican. And then I think it's interesting too is that again, there's not a monolithic response, so you do see definitely the majority of the politicians we call the rhinos, right, in the Republican Party, that they themselves are, diehard, uncritical supporters of Israel, right? But then you also have, like, if you actually go to like some of the influencers on social media, right, and you see their posts, their pro-Israeli posts, and then you read the comments below many of them, you come to find that while those people who are commenting may not necessarily have a positive position, a positive view of Muslims, or they may not be pro-Palestinians, but they're also not pro sending our money to Israel, right? Yes. So many of them are like, no, they're MAGA. It's like, no, America first. Like, for instance, I'm actually surprised, like someone like Candace Owens Candace Owens is getting sent out a very strong message. She worked for Ben Shapiro, so it's like, and so he has her show, and so it's her position is like, listen, that we have so many problems here in America, right? For us to be concerned about kind of send things over there, right? So, and then I don't know what Matt Gaetz is going to do now. Matt Gaetz, of course, he shot down the support for Ukraine, right? But now I don't know once they actually appoint a new speaker if he's going to support sending money after saying that we don't have any money to send, right? He might say, oh, well, he might support it, But anyway, just look at the base, you see that a lot of people in the base are like, no. We have our own problems. Israel is a different country. It's not the 51st state of America. Ukraine is not the 51st state of America either, right? And we want things here. Gas is too high. We can't afford a home. Crime is increasing in a lot of these cities, etc. We need to be, we have fentanyl problem. You see a lot of them saying things like this, so that in itself is a positive development, right? So it actually works against the Israeli lobby, to be totally honest. The fact that you have so many Republicans who are like, that we don't want to send any more money over there, right? Because we have, you're going to send checks for $700 a piece to people in Maui, right, who lost their homes, right, of no fault of their own. Right. But you're going to send how many billions to Ukraine and say, so for our money, you extract our tax money to send it overseas. So a lot of people are waking up. They've awakened to this fact, right? So we have to be a bit more nuanced and be a bit more sophisticated and thinking about a lot of these things, right? So, right. So let me see if I can go a couple more comments here. Or I haven't seen any questions yet, but there's a lot of comments. Here's another comment. Said the whole world accepts the dollar, and the dollar is in demand all over the world. That is why inflation is not as high as expected. The world's economy can absorb it. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, but
yeah, hopefully. I mean, we do have inflation. I think we've all felt it. Things just seem more expensive now, food and stuff like that. There's ways for them to monkey with the inflation numbers by taking things out and adding them to make it artificial. Like they can say, the price of computer chips have gone down. Well, yeah, that's because technology is better. But yeah, I think when you do print it, and even if it can absorb it, well, that's still theft from us, just because it maintains purchasing power. Just think how well it would do if that's true. Just think how well it would do if they didn't print it. Our dollars would be worth way more. We'd be much richer country. So yeah, I think it's better to not print it, and overall, I think that's a better model. And ideally, it shouldn't be up to politicians. I don't trust them to do anything. I wouldn't trust them to watch my dog. I have a dog and that I care about, and I wouldn't trust the government to feed my dog. I would worry that they would do something wrong. So I certainly don't trust them to decide how much money who should have what. Yeah.
Actually, I would say that. Yeah, while of course there's still a demand for dollars, I do still think that the dollar has been weakened both by too much printing, but also because other countries are starting to dump the dollar, right? You think of, for instance, the BRICS alliance, what was it? Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, right? That the BRICS alliance, they've actually announced that they have a goal of dumping the dollar completely in 3 years, right? To be totally off dependency on the American dollar, right? So with new sort of payment systems coming into play, I mean, I think we're going to see a continued weakening of the dollar. I think that the dollar is not going to go to zero, but it makes me think about whether or not. Well, of course, you think about whether or not it's partially planned, but at the same time, it made me think about if it's better for America to just be a strong republic as opposed to an empire, a weak empire, a crumbling empire, right? And the empire is falling apart, if not already falling, right? But it seems okay. Well, America should accept. You know what? We're not going to be the world reserve currency, right? It not. Maybe there won't be any world reserve currency at all in the future. We don't know, right? But clearly there are things happening in that financial realm, in the monetary realm that are revolutionary right now. That gives reason to believe that we're going to see a continued weakening of the dollar. Right? That's just my perspective from what I can see, because I look at some financial news as well. Right?
Yeah, I agree.
So here's a statement. Assalamu alaikum. I disagree with playing the middle. You should absolutely have to choose a side. One of our sisters. Yeah.
No, I agree on things. You do have to choose a side.
Yeah.
But I think, at least for me, and I'm not sure exactly which part she's referring to in our long conversation, but I think if she's talking about me, personally, there's a matter of choosing a side and then communicating effectively, and I think that I want to change. I have a unique position having, if I would have won, I would have been the first Muslim U.S. senator. I feel like that's some kind of responsibility because of how I can talk and what gifts I have with how I can reach people and who will listen to me and the doors I can get open. I can have a lot of politicians that will listen to me, the media, things like this. And I can convince people in a more, okay. Yeah, I see the rest of it. All of us. Yeah, I think it is important to take a side, and you can do that in your heart. And then but at least for me, the way that you communicate it, I think I place a real high priority on trying to be productive. It's so horrible. I really got upset last night on social media because it's just so unproductive. I want to have a conversation like this with people, and I want to take people like I've had very rewarding conversations where I've talked to other people who, maybe some other Muslim couldn't talk to the way I can to them, somebody who similar background to me or from my area or something like that. I could say, hey, I'm a veteran. I look like you. I'm from where you're from. And I'm telling you from my experience of being there and being a Muslim and going to my mosque and praying and reading the Quran and spending a lot of time, that you have misconceptions. And that has, more credibility. I've talked to my friend Mawai from Medina University. He can't do that. They look at him, they'll be skeptical. They say, well, they don't feel that they can relate to him. You know what I mean? But yeah, I agree with you. Yeah, it's important to take a stand. It's also important to be brave. And it's hard. Vivek is brave, even things, that not everybody agrees with. But I would encourage everybody to speak out. Just try and do it in as productive ways as you can.
Right. Here's another statement. If the Republican Party realized how many voters they could gain, they would abandon Israel to some extent. I think we sort of pretty answered that. But let me see if I can find something else here. I can't put my faith in the American political system where they can only allow two parties with almost similar agendas.
Yeah, it is a uniparty to some extent. As far as the previous comment, they could potentially get votes, but we have to show that, and it's politics is kind of a nasty game. There's not that many people who vote, and just getting people to show up is really key. If you can really show that you have power, it doesn't take that many people. If you can get 5,000 people who will vote in your state when you say to vote on a thing that you say to vote on, you have immense power, especially in a smaller state. Talk is cheap. A lot of people, like everybody will put something on their social media, but very few will actually vote. And unfortunately, money too is important. Very few will vote. Even fewer will donate to politicians. And I don't blame them because to your second comment there, it is kind of a uniparty. It's very much the same on issues of war and tyranny and all of these other kind of things. It's just different shades. It's Coke versus Pepsi, the two parties, Republican, Democrat. And there is third parties. I love the Libertarian is my favorite party, but they're not. They're just not able to win at all, and there's a lot of problems infighting and stuff within that party. So. All we can do is just participate. I would encourage people to find somebody they really like and just donate $10. Donate $10 to some campaign. I'm not running for anything, but somebody who is running, and get involved, get on mailing lists, show up at things, show up at events, ask questions. It really does matter. And because like right here in New Hampshire, for this primary, you have all of these candidates, billions and billions of dollars, Donald Trump and DeSantis and Vivek, all these big, massive teams with experienced people. They're all fighting for the primary votes, and they're fighting for a small number of votes. And there's a group here that's the prized voters. They're called the 404 primary voters. That means people who voted in 4 of the last 4 primaries. The average age of those people is, I think, 71 years old or 79 years old or something. It's over 70, I think. And but it's this tiny number. It's 30,000 people. It's like 30,000 people. But those votes really count a lot. If you can be one of those people who just shows up all the time and votes, you're going to have politicians, fighting for your vote, and it will matter, and especially if you have organizations and groups and things like that. You could have like the, Muslim Alliance of, Interfaith Peace or whatever, just some name that you make up, and you get a 504c and you make a little nonprofit and you put up your own webpage and you get 200 members and you get a piece of stationery. Believe me, politicians will take your call. They'll meet with you. They're afraid of you. If you write a letter and you say, hey, the Muslim whatever league wants a position on this, or we want to meet you, we want you to come, they'll go, because they really want to win these things. Every vote counts. 100 votes here, 100 votes there. A lot of these elections come down to small numbers. So we do have power. It is very discouraging. Believe me, I know. I mean, I get it. It's very, very discouraging at some points, but keep trying. What else can we do, right?
Yeah. Do you foresee the possibility of World War III in the near future is what they meant? Sorry, I meant the near future.
Sadly and tragically, I think it is a possibility, especially over the events of the last couple of weeks. It's so key to ratchet down the violence and the anger and the rhetoric. We must have peace. I wish we could just stop and pause everybody right now. We don't need anyone else killed. And we know that people will be killed tomorrow and the next day and the next day. And it could just continue to spiral. And then you have other regional actors get involved, and then the U.S. gets involved to stop them, and then Russia or China or something. Yeah, I mean, we're in a fourth turning. There's a great book by Strauss and Howell. It came out in '96 called The Fourth Turning. It talks about how every 100 years or so there's a generational change where things just shift and the world changes, borders change, money changes, thinking changes, institutions change. And we're in one. We're in times of epic change. Anything can happen right now. Anything is on the table. You could have different borders. You could have major countries disappear in the next 5 years. And usually these change happen like that. If you look through history, things are the same for decades and decades and decades. And then there's a little rockiness for a year or two. And then boom, a week or two, some major thing happens and the whole world changes. And 6 months after that, it is a completely different place. We've seen the beginnings of that to some degree in March of 2020 when they locked down the world. And that was kind of absolutely the moment that it was very clear that we are in this fourth turning and the world is changing in a radical and significant way. And it's unfortunately, historically, these times come with major global war and chaos and problems. And statistically, probably likely that we're going to continue to have more chaos and craziness for some more time. I hope it's less than a year, but it could be 8 years, But the good news is once it's done, hopefully, inshallah, we'll end up in a better place with a better system and more freedom, and the world will evolve and move on.
Yeah. I personally, I feel that we're already in World War III. That it's that it's largely, it just seems to me, it's largely a currency war. A currency war is an economic war, is a financial war, right? It has already begun, right? And I just hope that it doesn't become a nuclear war, that eventually that things are settled down. Of course, you're going to see a lot of people dying. We see a lot of people die in Ukraine. Now we're seeing people, of course, dying in the Palestinians and the Israelis as well. Hopefully that won't blow up, any further. It doesn't lead to, or of course, Iran entering, or Syria, Russia and China, right? Hopefully it won't turn into any of that. But it seems that a lot of what's happening is in response to the waning power of the United States in the world, that they're responsible. We have to do something to slow this down. So I sort of feel like it's already begun, right? We're in the midst of it right now, right? And it just hasn't, turned into a nuclear war at the moment, right? So, I could be wrong, but I think that that's just another way to look at it, but I think that if you see it that way, that you're already in the war, then it may lessen your anxiety, so it's like, well, but maybe it won't, right? Again, just try to give you another way to think about it. So, all right. But alhamdulillah, I really appreciate you taking out your time, Bruce.
Absolutely.
This really was fascinating exchange, conversation. Thank you for the audience for being with us today, and inshallah. So hopefully we'll have other opportunities to do this. You have any final comments you'd like to make before we go?
Well, thank you for everything you do. It's a real pleasure, and I mean, it's exciting times. It's times of opportunity. It's scary times, and all we can do is the best we can do. Turn to our faith and our, try and relieve anxiety. The plan is the plan. Whatever it is going to happen, and all we can do is be optimistic and do all we can to be the best people we can and move the world forward.
Inshallah. Beautiful. Barakallahu fikum. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Thank you for coming. Appreciate it.
Thank you.